So welcome everyone to another exciting session of the ACL Year-Round Mentorship. So the plan today is to discuss the topic of how to identify your next NLP project. Because as we know, as all of you know, there's a very sort of big variety of topics to choose from today, and also the field is moving at a different pace than a few years ago. So this question becomes more important on carefully choosing among the different options and among your different interests, and in terms of impact and other factors, how to choose your next NLP project. So we are very excited to have Luke Zettlemoyer, Sid Patwardhan, and Diyi as our three mentors here today. So the usual format is we'll give 5-6 minutes to each of our mentors to give a short introduction and a few initial thoughts about this question for the mentorship session today. And then we can start having a more open floor and start taking questions from the audience. And one important note is that we do have the Slido link for posting your questions. So please start posting your questions there, because that way we can see different types of votes for which question, and we can go by the questions that are most voted. And you can also copy paste your questions here on Slack, on Zoom if you want. Thanks. So yeah, so feel free to start your thoughts, mentors. I mean, we could go alphabetically, like Sid, Diyi, and Luke, but whatever you prefer. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Diyi. I'm an assistant professor at Stanford, and my research is about the natural language processing, computational social science. So when I first look at this title, like promising research directions, my first reaction is I also want to learn from this session, because that's some topic every of us is excited about. I don't think I am an expert in identifying promising directions, but I could share some of my experience in terms of dimensions we always use to look for a good project to start with. So the first thing is, I think by the end of the day, everything comes to your own personal interest towards research. What specific research topics excites you? You feel like, oh, this is so cool. This is something I really want to work on. Not something that the field is very popular or trending at this moment. Sometimes if you are lucky enough, those two match, and then that's great. Sometimes it might not match well. And the second dimension, as Mohit mentioned, is impact. So there are different type of projects. And then one exercise we always encourage students to do is to just write down any potential ideas or projects you might have into, let's say, a Google Doc. And then every day when you have any tiny thoughts, some of them might be great, some of them may not be great tomorrow, but then write down them and then try to say, okay, have a ranking in terms of which one I feel more excited, which one I feel like could have impact to the community. The other thing I want to mention here is that in order to come up with the next promising project, one practice I personally benefit a lot is to do a really good survey or literature understanding of the field. So you basically learn from prior work from all the great researchers in the field in terms of what they are working on, what they think are the challenges or the next big breakthrough. So those are the great ways to kind of get some starting point to think about what you could help to this specific thing. I think that's all the brief bullet points I have. And then the last comment is I really hope that every of us could just enjoy the type of work we are working on. So if that's something you feel really passionate about, and even it's something like humor, not a very specific to large pre-trained language models. That was one of the earlier project I did to get my interest towards NLP. So just enjoy what you are working on, and then yeah, I'm done.
Thanks, Dee. Yeah, very useful. Yeah, I think Sid is going next. Thanks.
Yeah, I can go next. Although I thought we were going alphabetical, but we can switch order. All right. Hi, my name is Sid. I'm an applied researcher at Apple, and I've been at Apple about 6 years. Before that, I used to work at IBM Research, and then I did my PhD before that at Utah for on information extraction. So my interests have been in information extraction, question answering, and then conversational systems more recently. The brief points I wanted to make for this session, and as I was thinking about this topic, like over the past few weeks, I was trying to jot down like what has been the source of ideas and topics that we've taken up in the past, and mostly it came down to like three specific things that I could point down to. The first one that I noticed was that a lot of things came from like looking for analogies in other people's work. So as you're reading other people's papers and doing some literature surveys, even in other fields, perhaps. So just an example of this might be that you might be reading something in computer vision, for example, and you look at the idea that was applied there and you say, hey, this is analogous to what I'm doing here, and I could maybe adapt this to what I'm working on. So looking for these analogies in different kinds of work that you're reading up. So what that would mean is that you should be reading a lot and then looking for these connections between what you're doing and what other folks have been working on. Even if the field is very different, it could be that the field that you're reading up is linguistics or cognitive psychology, and you might find some ideas there that resonate with what you're working on. The second source has been, I'll say, just data. So you're typically working on tasks in your day-to-day work, and you typically have to look for like where your model or your system is failing. So you would be looking at specific instances of failures, and you might see, hey, I see a pattern here for this kind of issue that I'm seeing from the output of my model. And you might say, hey, looks like the model is missing X kind of information, or looks like the model doesn't understand blah. And that might give you an idea for certain research directions, like, oh, perhaps I should have this model take into account maybe common sense world knowledge, or maybe the model should understand visual cues or whatever that might be that jumps out at you when you're looking at data. So that's another thing that I think we do a lot in our work, and that can be a source for ideas for next steps or directions that we might take. And these can be small, these can lead to much larger steps forward as well. And the third one I feel has been largely talking to others. I think I won't say just talking to others, but look, at conferences, you meet people and you talk to other researchers and you talk about what they're working on. And I feel like a lot of ideas and direction have come from just being excited about the different things other people are working on and saying, hey, this is something they're working on and that could connect to what I have, and making those connections with other folks, but also maybe generalizing that a little bit more, where when I'm reading papers and I go to like the future work section or the conclusion section, I think I am left with questions at the end, like why and how questions. Why does X happen, or how did this happen? And that leads to maybe like a research direction that you could follow up on. So these are like, I think, the three broad areas that came to my mind as I was reflecting on this, and maybe these will be like the theme throughout, for me at least, throughout this discussion. But I'm also keen to learn from all of you what you all have seen in the past as sources of new ideas and research directions. Thanks. I think I'll pause here.
Yeah, thanks. Very useful. I think Luke will go next.
Okay. Thanks, Mohit, for organizing, and thanks, Sid and Diyi. I think those are awesome overviews. It's hard to add a whole lot more on top of it. I completely agree with everything that was said. So I'm Luke Zettlemoyer. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, for over 10 years, and also part-time at Meta and FAIR, where I helped start up FAIR Seattle maybe 4 or 5 years ago. You know, I think it's really hard to pick research directions, but it's also fun. And, you know, you just have to try over and over again and just kind of, you know, keep experimenting, keep playing with things. And, you know, sometimes you even need to switch even when things are going well, just for variety, to keep yourself excited. And so I think it's a never-ending thing kind of throughout your career, just sort of keep thinking about this and trying to make progress on it. And I don't know that any of us are really perfect at it, right? So if you find it hard, you know, you're not alone, right? It's hard to know what to work on. A few comments, you know, play to your own strengths. So, you know, when you're starting with research, you maybe don't have that yet, but maybe you do. Maybe you had a double major. Maybe you have some industry experience. Maybe you're a systems level person, or maybe you like to prove theorems. You know, that's important to think about your strengths and places where you have unique insights, and you can be very creative about how to incorporate those. And similarly, along the lines, I think everyone else said this, but, you know, think about what's fun and what you enjoy also. And I think that's really important. But, you know, fundamentally, you know, the question you want to ask yourself is, you know, if you succeed at this research direction, you know, who will care, right? And there's no right answer here, but it's a good question to ask and to think strategically about. And I think that there's sort of a whole spectrum of answers, and, you know, at least 2 interesting points on the spectrum are you're starting up a whole new community, a whole new research direction. So maybe in the beginning, very few people will care because it's really new and different. But if you keep at it and you put in the long term and you build the community and you do the work, you can, like, you know, set a whole new direction that no one would have done otherwise. And that's very, very exciting. You know, another answer is you wade into the middle of the hot topic of the day, something like, you know, large language models, if you have the right resources, or, you know, whatever the next hot topic is going to be. And, you know, there, the chance of getting scooped is high, and, you know, it's very busy and fun and active. And, you know, sometimes even relatively small deltas can have big impact because lots of people are right there ready to jump on it and use it, right? And so there's just interesting trade-offs, and there's no really right answer for how to pick. But, you know, it's fun to think about. And if you think about it as opportunities as opposed to a stressful thing, you know, there's a wide range of things you can do that can be very exciting. And then the last little comment I would say is, you know, I assume that quite a few of you are just kind of getting started or relatively new in your research career. And I would say don't stress too much about this question at the very, very beginning, because actually a big part of starting in research is just learning how to do research. And so pick a direction that seems great. Don't stress about whether it's optimal, and learn how to do research. And then over time, iterate and get better and better and understand what you enjoy better and what's likely to be impactful. I get in there.
Great, thanks everyone. It's very insightful. Any mentor discussions for like the 3 of you among each other, based on any differences of opinions or agreement? I mean, just to make it interesting. Otherwise, we can move on to audience questions too.
It's hard to get controversy with a topic like this. I can try later. I can try to.
I think everyone agrees with each other, which makes sense for this kind of session. Yeah. So, did you have some thoughts?
No, I was going to say the same thing. This seems a very uncontroversial topic to begin with.
Right. So so please start adding more questions to the Slido. We have 2 questions already, so maybe we'll start with some of those. And then feel free to also raise your hand and directly ask questions to the mentors. So I'll start with some of the questions that are typed in. What is the most important factor to estimate the impact before doing a research project, since it is hard to predict what the future of a field will go towards? So I think that's a very good question. So feel free to go in any order in answering it. And I can copy paste it.
I could offer some perspective from like a social good perspective, since data seems to be more directly related to impact. So first, I think the impact is very contextualized. Depending on the specific research direction you are working on, impact might be defined a bit differently. For example, for many people who are working on NLP applications or use NLP for social good, the way of how to define impact could be, okay, if this type of application is successful, how could we help the world become a better place? That could mean in terms of climate, in terms of and the user who might be benefit from this type of technology, etc. So think about misinformation, think about mental health, therapy, and a lot of similar topics. I remember there is a great paper from one of the mentors for this ACL mentorship program, Zhi from so she has a great paper at ACL last year of how to quantify the impact of social good of NLP research. So I strongly encourage checking out that paper if you are interested in this like a social good direction. The other type of thing in terms of impact is to see, okay, how or to what extent this type of work could fill the gap in prior research. So going back to a lot of us mentioned as learning from prior work, learn to make analogy and then see what's missing, and then you have an idea of how concretely your proposed idea or work could fit into that gap. And that also means that always take a perspective from the community. So think about how this work could position themselves in the community. Yeah, that's 2 quick thoughts.
So I think I just wanted to. I think this is a great way to look at it, like how it will have an impact on social good. Maybe my perspective on this has been that I've always looked at it just the question that I've investigated as, are they interesting questions? And that's hard to categorize. It's to me it feels like a personal thing as. Is it firstly interesting enough to me to spend so much of my time working on it? And then also you can try to gauge some sort of a feel from the community as a whole, like how this question you're asking is going to affect the community. I think this is a hard question, but I don't know if that's something that you should worry about too much. As long as it's something that motivates you to do good and interesting research, you should go ahead and ask those interesting questions and try to follow research directions where you would be passionate about or the work you're doing. Eventually, I think you will find a community that resonates with your ideas if you have that, if you feel that they are meaningful to you. So that's I think that's how I've always looked at research questions.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And I will just throw in one other quick little thing, which is another factor that makes it really hard to estimate impact is kind of, it's not just the problem that you pick, but there's a bunch of other factors, including, sort of the sort of quality of the solution, for lack of a better word. Is there something surprising and unexpected there? Is there a twist? Is there something that gets people excited? And then the second factor is also just visibility. So, you could solve the most important problem in the world, but if you don't advertise it or write the paper in a way that people can understand it, then it won't take off. And so you have to kind of think about all aspects of the problem. And when you're picking a direction, part of the calculation is, what are the odds that I'm going to be able to do something interesting and unexpected here? Sometimes you just solve a problem any way possible, and that's great. Sometimes it doesn't matter, but, it's fun to do creative, unexpected things too, right? So, and that can definitely help the impact.
Great. So any follow-up questions from the audience on this question before we move on to the next question? I think we're getting a good diverse variety of opinions, like almost for completeness. So that's very useful, hopefully, for the audience. Was someone speaking up? It's a bit hard to tell. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So So I'll sample one more and then go back to, yeah. So what if the topic we want to do research on is not that popular? Should we try to adapt it to what others are working on? So very interesting question again.
I think adapting it is maybe a little bit strong, but thinking about how to tell the story in a way that others can understand and relate to is definitely worth doing. And we have to get into specific instances, but if there's kind of a 5% change, I don't know, the number isn't precise, but if there's some small change you can do that makes it easier for people to understand how it relates to what they're doing, that's usually a really good choice, right? You don't want to change the overall direction, but doing it in a way that makes it more accessible and more understandable and people can relate to how it's related to what they're doing is going to be great in general.
Yeah, I want to second what Luke said. Basically, I view myself, I hear echo. Okay. Yeah, basically, I view myself as someone who had a similar experience to this question. I can hear two of my voice.
Yeah, if someone is not speaking, please mute your microphone. I can only think of that as the reason for the echo. But okay. I see everyone's muted, so yeah, maybe you can try again.
That's good. It was just like I don't want to hear myself talking. Yeah. So when I saw this question, I sort of related to what I have been going through. So in the very beginning, I was very interested in all sorts of social dimensions of NLP, like maybe back in 2010-ish type of thing. So yeah, and I adopted some sort of strategy like Luke mentioned, try to make the type of work you are doing easily understandable by others, and then get visibility for the type of work you are working on. And also one advantage of this type of non-popular topic is that, so if you go to a conference, everyone is talking about prompt tuning, and you are working on humor detection. People are more interested in joining a social conversation with you to learn more about what you are working on, and your work is more memorable versus others, right? So that's one benefit of getting yourself recognized or visible in the community. The second is that I think sometimes it's also about like making connections to what type of intersection you can benefit from each other's work. Even the work you are working on is non-popular, there might be ways, if your communication, like the prior sort of dissemination of your work is smooth, then you can actually get expert from different aspects to help you with the current work, or your work could might inspire others' work. So that type of discussion from multiple very different perspectives, some of them are popular, some of them are unpopular, might trigger new advances. So we all know that a lot of the breakthrough actually come from people from very different type of background talking about the same subject. So you have higher potential to do something bigger. Having said that, I think there are also other dimensions here. For example, there might be like some sort of, oh, I feel a little bit marginal in the community since I'm doing something unpopular. But by the end of the day, you find your sub-community. Our community is big enough. There will be a small group of people you could hang out, you can talk to, and it's easier for you to build like more bonded relationship there.
I think I was gonna say almost exactly what Diyi said, which is like, even if you're working on something very specific and niche, I think Luke's point was awesome, which is that communicating that to the broader community in a way that's easy for others to understand is definitely something that you want to do. But in addition to that, finding connections with other research areas where your work can intersect with other people's work really helps build like the application of where your niche area might apply and might improve something else perhaps. So finding those connections and expanding your the scope of your impact that way is something you want to do throughout your career. The other thing you want to also do is, even though you're working on something niche, you want to also start thinking about what is like the next generalization of what you're thinking about. Maybe if you're looking at a very specific linguistic feature, perhaps, for something, you could think of what's the next bigger language characteristic that encompasses what you're working on, and how does that impact your niche area, and then start thinking about the problem a little broader and maybe broaden your scope that way. But I think you'll start doing it over time anyway, because once you start working in a specific area, start becoming an expert in that area, you automatically start thinking about the related topics to that, and I think that will happen automatically. It's not something that you should be worried about.
Great, thanks everyone. Very useful answers. So maybe I can move on to the next question, which is also very useful question. For young researchers, do you encourage them to dive deep into one specific area to possibly get more results, publications, or explore different topics? And I guess the focus is on the word young research, or let's call them early career researchers, because a 50-year person could also start a PhD.
Could you also paste that question here? I didn't quite get the.
I'll copy it here.
I guess from my perspective, it's a balancing act. As always, I don't have a very controversial answer here, but if you switch topics every single paper, there's just huge overhead. It's really great for learning, but it's, even bad maybe because you're going to have to, most new researchers are going to have to get a job in research, N years into the process or something like that. And, it's good to be known for some more substantial thing. So I would say, certainly first, very small number of years, don't worry about it, explore, try lots of different stuff. But relatively early in your career, you don't have to do 100% on one area, but you need to have a theme that kind of emerges, that kind of you become known for that direction, so that you can build up your research experience and when people know the kind of stuff you're interested in. So it's a balancing act. You never have to do 100%, but if you always move, it will be, huge amount of overhead for each project, and it will kind of delay the development of that research experience, or the sort of research brand, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I think I agree with Luke here, but you don't want to be switching topics very often, because then you don't really get deep enough to have meaningful impact. And I think that's what you want to be doing, is you want to have meaningful impact, and for that it typically takes some time with a specific topic to have that impact. Having said that, if it is not something that after you've worked on it for a while, it seems like it's not something that you're excited about anymore, then you should definitely move to something that does excite you. So yeah, as a young researcher, you do want to make those changes, but maybe not as often as like every other paper is just a completely different topic. It's probably not going to be good for you.
I'm going to say something different. I like both. I agree, like all this potential balance here. One thing I would like to mention is that don't be concerned about this type of thing. I would recommend follow the flow. That means that let's say you finish project 1 And maybe in the process, you are just very excited about that type of technique. You want to generalize it to other domain. You want to improve certain aspects so that the model could lead to better improvement the next time, etc. Versus, oh, I learned something else during this process. I want to explore that. So you will make a decision by yourself. Just follow that type of pattern. If you feel like, oh, I have a strong desire to improve that paper, then go with it. If you feel like, oh, I really like the other project I learned through this process, maybe it makes sense to give it a try. Yeah, I think it's more like a sequential thing. So if you look back, we may know how to better balance different factors. But at that moment, I think just follow what you feel most exciting to yourself and follow the flow.
Great. Any live questions? Maybe I'll wait for any follow-ups to the questions, the answers that were given before moving on to the next question from the Slido link. Okay, great. So, sorry, was someone speaking up?
I think I see a follow-up question to the thinking about the next generalization. I think this is a question following up on what I said. Let me see if I can think of a good example here. Okay, so maybe I'll try to explain this in a way that might make sense. I don't know if it even makes sense in a way. Okay, let's say you're working on a topic which is very, very niche, and you're looking at maybe like noun compounds in language for a very specific task. Once you've spent some time on that, you maybe want to start looking at like a bigger picture. Maybe there's a broader category of language characteristics that include what you're working on, and you want to start studying how those influence your specific topic and broaden the scope of your topic. So I don't know if these days we really are working on such niche topics, but if you do, then you want to start thinking about those. Or let's say another one that more recently that I've been involved in was like model compression, and we were taking like a very specific approach to model compression, and we spent a bunch of time on making models small using this very specific approach. And then my next step might be to broaden that to see how other techniques work together with mine, or is there other questions related to model compression where I don't actually need to compress the model, but maybe I can do something else which lets me run the model without actually compressing. So broadening the scope of your questions themselves can lead you to research directions that are related, but not quite in that same small space that you're working in. So that's kind of what I mean by generalizing your question space itself.
Great, thanks for the clarification. Another interesting question that I think is also relevant for this panel, because we're sort of half academia, half industry almost. I think, Luke, I can consider you 50-50 almost. So the question is, should the direction matter more for junior researchers that don't plan to stay in academia forever? Should it matter how transferable it is in industry or to industry once they graduate and join industry?
I mean, I think that there's many different goals you can have as a PhD student or a young researcher. And I think, even in industry, there's many different kinds of roles you could be going after. So it's kind of hard to answer that generically. But I would say that in general, it makes sense to design what you're working on, to prepare you for whatever you're planning to do next, right? It's a very generic statement, but you could imagine if you want to go, your PhD is like an exposure to research, but really what you want to learn is to become like an independent thinker, and you're going to go do startups afterwards, or you're going to go work on advanced tech in a really fast moving environment or something. That there are a lot of great projects like that where you can contribute to the field and you can learn those skills, and it's absolutely excellent, right? There's no judgment on what people want to do next in their career. I think that's just wonderful. Maybe you want to go to industry and get into a top research lab, and there it would be very similar to academic environment where the research trajectory, like we've been talking about, does matter. So I think it's also totally great to think about your research direction in terms of the skills that it helps you build. Maybe we haven't really highlighted that as much, but you can do things just to learn new topics, or just to kind of show off that you have certain skills to help you kind of make that next career step. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I think it's great.
Any thoughts, Sid or Diyi?
Yeah, I don't have much industry experience, but I think that like we have students who are interested in industry. We also have students who are interested in academia, especially for PhD students. In the first 2 years, what I tend to do is to have a conversation with students to see, okay, what type of career path they want to do. And then, yes, I think every of us needs to be like thinking about what we want to do, and use that to get the potential projects or type of courses you may want to take. Like if you are very sure that you want to go to industry, I think it's probably okay to try some techniques or some projects that are more related to industry interests, versus, or if you are like more like, oh, I want to do academia, then some of the more challenging, more ambitious, all sorts of things might be worthwhile doing. Having said that, just like Luke mentioned, I think the industry has all sorts of positions these days. Like even you are working on something like very social-ish, there are UX researchers, there are different type of computer social science positions, etc., etc. So you will find a good fit. It's just like maybe it's not that visible from what you see at the conference and then those job advertisements.
So I think Diyi and Luke have covered pretty much most of the questions here. I do think like industry and academia, there is still a huge spectrum here. Like even when I think of industry and within our company, there's so many different kinds of roles that when you say industry, you could mean that you want to apply your research to have impact on products, which is a very different kind of skill set. I think there you want to learn to be able to take ideas that are out there and figure out how to make them work in like a real world setting. While in sort of a lab setting, which could be an industry lab or academia, you're kind of asking research questions, which may not relate to like a product, but it's to kind of further your understanding of a certain area, and that requires a different kind of process of work, like how you run experiments and how you think about things, versus if you're thinking about a product and applying your research there. So I think you do need to think about like what kind of a role you intend to get into, even if you're thinking about the industry, and then think about what your skill set should be to fit that role. Yeah, I do believe that like these are two fairly different kinds of ways of thinking and working, which require sort of learning on the fly. So yeah, that would be my advice. Like when you're thinking about industry and academia, just think about like the specific role you're imagining yourself to be and work towards that.
Thanks. I think sort of a continuation of that question, which also got high number of votes is something on the academic side. In terms of academic employment, say a postdoc after a PhD or a tenure track faculty position, how much does the research topic play a role? So that could be a related question that we can finish first, and then maybe we'll take one or two last questions.
Can you cut and paste it again? I didn't question after what?
Yeah, sorry. So it says in terms of academic employment, say a postdoc after a PhD or a tenure track faculty position, how much does the research topic play a role in getting that position?
Thanks. I'll let someone else go first this time.
And here, is the question specifically about like, yeah, it's for a faculty position, right? So maybe Diyi can answer this one.
Okay. Yeah, I have been thinking about this. I think this is the type of question that might get controversial, but we try to stay on the less controversial side. I have been reflecting on this, and every year we have students who want to be on the market, and then so I guess there are different aspects. First, your research topic definitely matters. In many universities, especially if they are trying to hire a postdoc or assistant professor, there is a focused area. In most cases, they might post it in their job advertisement, or you can try to talk to the department who is hiring, and then try to say, oh, is there a specific direction in terms of NLP that you are looking for? Of course, this is when you get to that stage. In the earlier stage of your PhD, I think this matter less, because you really cannot predict what's going to be popular in 5 years. Take the social science, computational social science as one example. I think 7 years ago, it was less popular, and then not many people working on that. So if you are like, oh, because this is not popular, so I'm not going to choose that direction because I could not get a good job, that definitely not works, right? So I think still in the earlier stage of the PhD, it's okay just to do whatever excites you. We talk about the impact, etc. So that's the criteria. When it comes to the job search process, I think in most cases they will make it explicit in their job advertisement, and then you will have an idea of what type of people they are looking for. Sometimes there are some special cases. For example, I also know a few universities that don't have specific focused area. They are looking for people who are just outstanding. So it could be a very niche area. It could be something very trendy or popular. Yeah, that's all I have. I think it's really hard to kind of tailor yourself from the very beginning in terms of what these jobs are looking for. It's like doing what you are excited and you are good at in the first few years, and then use the last 2 or 3 years for some strategic pitch of your own brand.
I'm also curious about this question. Maybe Mohit, Luke even. So when for faculty interviews, like is the interview panel is typically diverse. They're professors from all the other fields even, but are they looking for specific topics? Like is the university thinking, yeah, we need somebody from XYZ area to work here, or is it more general? Yeah, NLP. We want somebody doing NLP and ML.
Yeah, I mean, I think Diyi said it pretty well, but just to add maybe a little bit more of my flavor to it, I think it's very dependent on the department. One way to think about it is you're kind of trying to make a strategy for your department to be successful. So, it's also very different if you're, say, the first hire in an area, like the first NLP hire versus a later one. But, there are different strategies departments can take. So it's often a strategy that you would want, like, of course, you want the best people you can get, but you also want to balance, diversity of topics. So you may not hire someone because they're too close to someone that's already there. I think that's pretty common, even if they're amazing. And especially if they're kind of the same seniority, maybe it makes sense if there's like a seniority difference or something. But other departments might take a different strategy. So they might really double down. Maybe you're not as big of a department. Maybe you can't cover all areas. Maybe you say, even within NLP, we're not going to try to cover all of NLP. We're going to become the best place for machine translation or something, or we'll really double down on this aspect of it. We'll get a bunch of people in that area, and then we'll have competitive advantage because for the people wanting to work in that area, this would be the place to be. So I think that it's really depending on the strategy, the hiring strategy of the department. I think not all departments have explicit hiring strategies. I know UW has been amazing since I joined. Like we sort of strategize and try to do cluster hires in areas. And, NLP was one of those over the course of my career where we've really grown a lot, and it's been amazing. But different people take different strategies. And so unfortunately, the only real advice here is, you gotta, it's a good old boy system. You gotta actually talk to people in the department and figure out if you really care about that department. But taking a step back, I would say also, sadly, part of academia is you have to be somewhat flexible. You got to apply broadly, and you got to go for the opportunities that are there. And usually if you're doing good research, especially in NLP during the time of growth that's been going on over the last 10 years, there's just so many amazing opportunities that it's a great time. You can't guarantee I'm going to get in that one university you really want. I mean, I really wanted to live in Seattle, so it worked out really well for me, but it doesn't usually work that way. But you do get someplace great. And then the last little comment, just to be, building on what Diyi said, I actually personally, working in an area that's not really well established is really great. And my favorite kind of research profile, and this is just a personal thing, it's not like universal, but I really like researchers that kind of identified in a problem or area that was important but wasn't popular, and then they made it popular, right? They showed leadership, not necessarily by themselves, it's a community effort. But I find that incredibly impressive. There are other ways to be impressive too, but that's a really, really great profile. And so you can even think about it that way.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents would be, I agree with everything being said, and then especially what Diyi said, right? I don't think it will be very possible or feasible to fit yourself to the future formula of what a specific department will look for. But the good news is, like Luke said, there are many more opportunities and a lot of NLP machine learning hiring these days. And so if you're a little bit flexible, you will find a good department that satisfies your locational and research needs. But in terms of the postdoc part of the question, I mean, that part is much easier, and that will luckily be your first step, maybe, right? So you will, if you're working on an area and you have this sub community that Diyi mentioned a while back, then you will have senior people in that sub community looking for postdocs, and so that gives you another opportunity, right, to sort of have a more shorter term period to cater to what the current faculty job market is looking for, right? Because you can sort of partially adapt and enhance and complete your profile during your postdoc, right, for that future faculty job in mind, which is much harder to do in a 5 to 6 year or 4 to 6 year PhD span. So the good news is, yeah, there are multiple possible steps to this path, and you will have opportunities to cater to it. Great. So I think we're running out of time. So maybe briefly we can take the discussion going on Zoom. I think the questions are a bit long, so I'll summarize it briefly. I guess the overall question is more about when you're working on a certain topic that has many sub-parts and sub-communities happening in disjoint fields, how should the PhD student do an extremely sort of thorough and comprehensive multi-community literatures review and be able to generate ideas out of those? Continual learning was thrown out as one example, but there's other related examples.
Yeah, I could jump in since I sort of, sorry, I was like trying to do both the speaking and the typing, so I was very brief there. Yes, I think this is a great question. And my only suggestion is that leverage what the community already has or what the outside world already has. So for many topics these days, if you feel like, oh, this is so important and many fields are working on that, I'm sure there are already some efforts going on trying to either organize workshops on that, or like having tutorials for that, or having sort of self-organized activity on those. So instead of doing all those type of extensive literature survey or review by yourself, leverage what has been there already. Check out those tutorials, check out those courses or workshops, then listen to those talks to get a concrete idea and bypass that process of doing all of those on your own. And then also, that means there's a community for that, a very sub-community might be emerging. And it's great to get your get some feedback from that community as well, talking to people there, and then discuss potential projects. So that's one way that I think could be very helpful, and it will reduce a lot of a lot of efforts there.
Great. Yeah, I think tutorials and workshop talks and proceedings, I think, is what I usually recommend. Luke, maybe some thoughts. I think you were sharing some thoughts, and then we can take the last question.
Yeah, great. And I completely agree. And one thing I would just to have the ever little bit of controversy, I actually sometimes encourage students not to do too heavy of a literature review right at the very beginning. I mean, you definitely need to do it earlier rather than later. But, there's a fear that if, you just read everything in an area that you get kind of locked into the way that the literature thinks about that area. And so, it's a balancing act. There's no perfect thing here. It's also a style thing, but I think it can be useful to kind of try to think from first principles about problems and think about what problems might exist, brainstorm some ideas on your own or with friends, not in isolation, but, kind of locally without overly searching the entire literature. But then, before you invest a huge amount of time, of course, you need to go and actually do your due diligence and make sure that, you haven't reinvented the wheel or whatever. I mean, at that point, you can often anchor to very specific pieces of work that you trust, from places you trust that kind of, you can, if you differentiate relative to them, you'll be okay relative to the bigger literature.
Great. Sid, any thoughts, or should we move on to the last question?
So I just wanted to echo that was advice that my advisor also had given to me when I started working on research, which was like, no, don't go and read anything just yet. Just think about the problem yourself. And that kind of prevents you from getting biased from the directions people are taking on a specific topic. And if you're just starting out on the topic, maybe you want to start thinking about it like without the biases of like external ideas. And then of course you should go and look and see, like, has this been done before? But I think keeping that mind open at the beginning helps. The other thing that I think I did, I just realized that was something also that had come to mind, which was like going to workshops. I think is a very good idea, because that's where like the early ideas are being tried out, and that gives you like more ambitious research directions that you might take up. So workshops might be a good place to also get very nice ideas. So I think that again, this was said, but I do want to echo that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I usually, I guess my 2 cents are usually that, yeah, like Luke said, don't get pigeonholed. But then the good thing is that the pigeonhole is so big these days, right? That it's like, unlike 15, 20 years ago, it's not a small hole. So luckily the hole is big enough that you'll not get pigeonholed in the traditional sense. But also in this case, for this particular question, since the literature is spread across multiple communities, you actually have multiple holes to look through. So which is good, because then in some sense you actually get to see very different perspectives from different communities looking at the same problem. And so that could give you some perspective on how to bring together things and sort of do like a more complete, bigger, better version. But yeah, it's a balancing act in terms of not getting overbiased. So I think we have only 2 minutes. So one question, there's 2 questions that have equal number of votes, but one of them will take much more time. So please feel free to email the mentors and continue the discussion. But the question that might take a shorter amount of time is, I'm at the beginning of my PhD. I feel that I have some ideas, but I couldn't fit a coherent storyline into these topics. Should I be concerned?
My answer is no, because you're at the beginning of a PhD, and the whole point of the beginning of the PhD is to learn how to do this stuff. and that it's totally normal to not know how to make a coherent story of all the exciting ideas you have in your head. I even struggle with that now, but especially when you're starting, it's really common. And, make sure what you're working on is exciting and or helping you grow your skills, and talk to people, your advisor, your student colleagues, the folks at workshops, at conferences, and so forth, and keep working on it, and you will get there. And it's totally fine. Which is not to say you shouldn't try to get there. You should keep trying, but it's totally normal to not be there in the beginning.
I want to second this question. I also feel like it's really hard to get a coherent storyline these days. I think it's not any of ours fault. It's like, think about these days with this type of research, it's getting, the boundary between different fields is getting blurred, and we have more applications, etc. So yes, the answer is no, and everyone suffers from this. And also I feel like create a story on top of that, and maybe what defines you is you have this very diverse research portfolio.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add. I think I agree. I don't think it's something to worry about. It is something that everyone struggles with, me included, and it's totally normal.
Awesome. So yeah, so right on time, it's 1 Eastern, 10 Pacific. So let's thank our awesome mentors again for all the advice, and please feel free to continue the conversation. And Abhay has helped us record the session, so we'll also do the usual YouTube link and post it on our channels. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.